just want to welcome all of you to our webinar this morning, and I'm joined with my colleague Antoine Smoke, who will let anybody else in the waiting room and keep us all on task. But I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for taking the time. We have a great, diverse group today. I will not go down the list because everybody can see who's on the call, but I'll just mention that we have representatives from various economic development authorities in the region. We've got folks from the state of Georgia, from SBDC, a few folks joining us from various consulate offices. And of course, we have some World Trade Center Savannah partners, as well as some of our board members. So thank you all for attending. I know it's going to be a great next hour. As we're on a virtual platform, I would ask if everyone would just please mute themselves. We'd love to see your faces if you want to share the video, but please mute yourself. And know that if you have any questions throughout the program, please just raise your hand or feel free to type it in the chat box. There will certainly be room and time for questions at the end. So if you think about it during the program and don't want to interrupt, just type it in the chat box and we will certainly get to that. And if time doesn't allow during the program, we'll certainly follow up with Dr. Brown afterwards. So with that said, I want to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Brown is a native of Philadelphia. He's a graduate of Florida International University, where he earned his PhD in International Studies, specializing in democratization and democratic theory. Dr. Brown is a professor at the at Georgia Southern University in the Department of Political Science and International Studies. And today he's going to discuss the potential impacts of the recent election on global trade and what Georgia companies need to know. Dr. Chris Brown, we welcome you, and we'll turn it over to you to share your slides and get started.
Thank you very much. Thank you, World Trade Center Savannah, and thank you all for joining us. Hopefully, above all, I would like for this to be useful for everyone involved. So if you have any questions, please, I'm available to you afterwards or during the presentation. This is probably the most folks I've had on my Zoom in a while, given the loose attendance requirements at Georgia Southern. So, but let me just get set up here and okay. All right, how are we doing? Everybody see it? Can you hear me fine? Yeah, everyone can hear? All right. So today, I was asked to talk a little bit about the politics of trade and how Georgia companies have been impacted, particularly in light of the latest elections. We talk about the 2020 elections. We have a change of presidential regime from the Trump administration to Biden, which, on the surface of the campaigning, it seems to be substantively different. And then obviously all of us here in Georgia were aware of the second part of the elections in which the Georgia Senate runoffs, which led to a change in the Senate, which then has provided an opportunity for Democrats essentially to be able to get some legislation done a little bit easier, although it's not going to be easy street. It's a little bit easier. And so what you see is some of these administrative changes that are that have happened that have facilitated Democrats from being able to submit legislation that may or may not be passed after. And so I want to talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan as it pertains in general, and then maybe touch upon some of the things that impact the businesses and the interests that you guys have, so that we can talk about them in questions. So that's kind of the trajectory. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the general comparisons for trade. I want to talk about Biden's campaign rhetoric, since they're so early in the game here. It's hard to actually say, this is what Biden is doing. So we can talk about what we'll be doing. We can project some of this stuff. So based on what we know, and there are some tantalizing clues as to the basis for the policies that he's already suggested and that are already sort of underway in the House. So I think from a policy perspective, we have a pretty good idea about where it's headed. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is subject to the politics of the Republic. And so as it gets into committees and things like that, there's and in different chambers of commerce, or chambers of the Congress, different things will happen. So with all that said, in my caveats, If you think about the trade comparisons under 45 and 46, and this is extremely rudimentary, the general rhetoric under Donald Trump, the concept of America first, tended to be a bit adversarial. The argument against Trump's trade regime was essentially a promoted wealth over development and for quick gains. So basically, if we could make a buck here, if we can renegotiate something and get something out of it, that would be better than long-term stability. And what we saw in other than the stock market, what we saw is that there's some volatility with trading, a good bit of havoc, particularly among our allies. And this is, again, this renegotiating the trade deals. If there's one thing that businesses tend to like, it's very clear rules and a stable environment, to be able to invest and grow. It's been a little quirky or arbitrary. Part of his governance has been based on personal affect, the relationships that he's had in the past and the ones that he's cultivated. So we've seen the renegotiation of NAFTA, USA, Korea, FTA, and a preliminary deal with Japan that didn't really get any further than sort of some basic outlines. Of more notable trade decisions under the Trump administration has been to withdraw from the TPP, the lack of serious interest in the EU trade deal, and a disengagement with the WTO, even an adversarial relationship with the WTO, and threatening to pull out. Most notably, probably for all of us on the phone now, the trade war with China, and sort of the tariffs that are weighing down our relationships with our allies, particularly in the EU and Canada. For Biden, the Made in America, and we'll talk more specifically about these policies a little bit further, the idea about restructuring the economy for the future. There's a big emphasis on manufacturing. There's an emphasis on manufacturing, particularly for green energy. And there's an emphasis on supply chain reinforcement and efficiency. The realization in mid-COVID is that all COVID policy is economic policy. And for now, given the circumstances that we're in, most economic policy has to be COVID policy. And there's a reason for this that's embedded in sort of some of the larger developmental trends, but I'll get to that in a minute. For now, there's an expectation that there'd be some short-term hardship in exchange for long-term stability. And by short-term hardship, there's a few things, the increase in corporate taxes, the guilty TI stuff that we'll talk about later, and the need, I guess, for now to be able to try to undo some of the policies that might be a little bit painful for larger corporations, but in the long run, the idea would be that we would be more competitive, particularly against China. So Joe Biden has historically been an advocate for trade liberalization. He says fair trade now. Free trade was the phrase back in the day. The difference for Joe Biden, in contrast to other trade liberal advocates, is that he's extremely pro-union. Joe Biden, Scranton and Delaware, right, Wilmington, just outside of Philadelphia. And so those Rust Belt states will also weigh heavy in terms of his inclinations, perhaps on a personal level, but also his ability to make those kinds of decisions for Congress. So to try to get some of these things passed, particularly with tariff reductions and stuff. So we'll talk about that in a minute or two. Environmental conditions are also important for Joe. He's really made it a case that we are looking for climate change is real and we are going to move forward, and any new investment ought to be something that is sustainable. So what I would expect to see is that we'd rejoin the TPP, we'd promote US deals, we'd get re-engaged with a post-Brexit UK, we would re-engage with the WTO. I think overall, the Biden administration has come in with the realization that globalization has led to increased inequality. COVID has exacerbated all of this stuff. And so what we need to do is sort of review and reset our existing trade relationships. So as part of that, you'll see that not a whole lot has been done in terms of trade so far on removing tariffs and stuff with Biden so far. And part of that is I think, just an opportunity to gain leverage to be able to re-engage negotiations. So during the campaign, Biden promoted what was called a Build Back Better. And this was really designed for a recovery plan for working families, right? This idea is that we need to focus on middle class stuff. So shift from Wall Street, looking at the Dow, and focus on Main Street, small businesses, SMEs, medium-sized businesses, and really residential communities to rebuild communities. So the Build Back Better that was outlined in the campaign attempted to sort of frame things in a series of crises that, the Trump administration has led us to these crises, right? We have a public health crisis, we have an economic crisis, there's a crisis of inequality, there's a pending environmental crisis. And so Build Back Better presumably outlines a series of policies in the campaign that were about sustainable growth, equity, resilience. He gave three main talks on Build Back Better and what he expected in this Build Back Better program. So you can see pandemic policies, economic policy. It's a holistic approach, and the idea is we're building for the future. So obviously COVID is the most important. So the COVID campaign takes over this trust science, vaccines, has to take priority. As part of his platform at this point about what the expectations are for Build Back Better, there's a series of policy initiatives that are sort of short-term, medium-term to long-term, and they blend together. So there's phases, but it's not a stop-start. It's a multi-phased approach to addressing some of these. First one is there's the immediate relief for working families. Most folks are keyed into when am I getting my stimulus checks, right? This $1,400 if you earn less than 75,000 or 150,000 per family, but also the March 14th deadline coming up for unemployment benefits and protections is really the deadline for any kind of new legislation. It needs to happen soon. Along with that, Biden has promoted sending aid to state and local governments to help maintain essential services. Those of you who are involved in these state and local government organizations are aware of the emergencies and the overtime and everything else that's gone into COVID management, particularly from a public health standpoint. And so the idea here is to sort of try to help everybody get back to a point where they can start conducting business again without worrying about the balance of payments, and then create a public health corps. Another short to medium term is to emphasize manufacturing, innovation, technology. Many of you guys on the call, this is one of the big things that you're focused on in Georgia in particular, has been extremely successful in promoting manufacturing and the rise of green technology and digital services. So supply chain management and efficiency, we just saw the more recent review of batteries and of semiconductors is related to the supply chain management and efficiency. To promote and expand our U.S. industrial base that was lost over the course of globalization and offshoring of foreign companies going overseas and then selling stuff back is made in America. To promote green manufacturing as a growth engine. And this is something, we talk about a little bit later, and I don't want to get to waste all of the time on the talk. I wanted to make it a little bit breezy. But China has realized that green manufacturing is a growth engine. And in order for us to be competitive, we need to get on board with some of this. I'm not saying that they're playing fairly necessarily with this, but we need to get on board with this. It's not something that we can just let go. To stockpile strategic resources, what we've seen in the pandemic is that where supply chains were complex, they were inadequate for managing the pandemic, everything from vaccines to pharmaceutical approvals to providing enough PPE for hospitals and essential services. So they sort of raised the alarm. The projection here is that 5 million jobs will be created by the early phases of this, and Moody's goes as far as to say that 18.6 million might be created out of this new manufacturing initiative. So, and another thing that is fairly indicative of the buyback or Build Back Better program is you'll start seeing a lot more public-private partnerships. And I know many of you guys are involved in that stuff already. So Georgia's really well poised to take advantage of this stuff. So medium term, we're going to see modernization of the infrastructure. This infrastructure will be sustainable infrastructure to upgrade, repair roads, to provide access points for electric cars. Of particular importance is a recognition that internet access is critical. We have a tendency to sort of think about this as a mainly for-profit operation, and the challenges of getting internet and information technology into the hands of regular folks, particularly school kids during the pandemic, has been a bit challenging, even for Georgia Southern, to be able to manage to get its students all having laptops, having access, being able to to have internet signals where they live and stuff like that. The key to this is basically to create something that's going to manage climate change. And part of that is a transition or job retraining to get folks for development purposes into the green economy. So the new jobs won't necessarily be directed towards older technologies, but be directed toward new ones. So medium long term, this goes into the idea of the more holistic concept of it is of Build Back Better is a caregiving educational workforce. People live better lives if they're not as stressed, and part of that stress, particularly in light of dealing with all the uncertainties of COVID and jobs and everything else, is to deal with families, child care services, elder care services, disability services. All of these things need to be expanded. So I would expect to see an increase in not only the pay, an increase in the educational opportunities and the jobs for these kinds of things to help people who, even if you're working remotely, to be able to manage your child care services. So I would expect to see a more robust social system emerge over time. Medium to long term, the Build Back Better program talks specifically about racial equity and inclusion. And so to recognize that systemic racism exists, discrimination exists, it has an impact today, and that there needs to be an active effort to close the racial gap and to sort of provide for covering up those gaps by providing affordable housing, access to education, criminal justice reform, and then an investment in minority businesses. So these are some of the more gradual changes. The $15 minimum wage will be is in the rescue plan, so we'll talk about that a little bit. The expand Obamacare was already one of the things that Biden has done by executive order and plans to do more with. Extend paycheck fairness, that's also in the rescue plan, to provide sick leaves for employees so that people, if they have to be sick, particularly with COVID right now, people need sick days. We want to make sure that they are compensated for them. Otherwise, you can't afford to be sick, and people go to work sick, and then they get other people sick. We've all been there. So, and then the unionization is another factor. I wanted to bring attention to Biden's executive actions. We talked about his campaign. On his first day, he passed a series of executive actions. And you can see most of the executive actions are in line with the promises that he said during his campaign. These are many COVID-related things. We've rejoined the Paris climate, which has an impact on the automotive folks out there on the call. And then a lot of the things were about equity. So you can see, I don't want to go through them all, but I just wanted to, and I categorized them roughly. Some of them might be able to fit in one or two categories, but there were so many of them I don't want to talk specifically about any one, but just to give you guys an opportunity to take a look. So the one that relates most closely to what we'll be talking about today is the Tighten Buy American rules on the first column, and then the last column here, review supply chains for semiconductors and other critical goods, which is relates directly to what we're talking about. To bring it into an international perspective, the idea of Build Back Better emerged in the due to a series of emergencies in the early part of the 20th century, disasters in Haiti with the earthquakes when the buildings collapsed, and the earthquakes that caused tsunamis in Asia. And so the Third World Conference, UN Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2015 created what was called the Sendai Framework. And so the Sendai Framework embraced the idea of Build Back Better. So the word's been sort of bandied around international circles about what it actually, this is what we got to do it better. I mean, in the case of Haiti, it almost seems like, well, this is anecdotal, right? Their buildings collapsed, so we need to make sure that we have structural changes and, regulations and oversight on building. But it was really embraced by the OECD as the way forward, latest in June 2020. The Sendai Framework outlines a framework for disaster risk reduction going forward, and it is essentially the model for for Biden's Build Back Better program. Again, I don't want to get you bogged down with all this stuff, but you'll see over the course of it, it's a more holistic engagement. It's inclusive. It attempts to prevent disasters, the impact of disasters, but it does so in such a holistic and inclusive way. The quotes here are directly from the Sendai Framework to help prevent these things. So the pandemic fits perfectly into the efforts that were already underway on the international scale to be able to manage by 2030 something like a pandemic on this scale, or something that with the economic social, and public health elements of this. And so just to give you an idea that there is an international precedent. Again, I don't want to get us bogged down here, but you can see as I'm speaking about the different issues. This is really, we're on disaster management right here. And so Biden's connection to this essentially is related to the Build Back Better from the OECD policy, which emerges from the United Nations, which promotes this idea of recovery must be done something, not just Build Back Better as a slogan. It sounds good, but there's actually substantive policy expectations with this. So the most obvious and clear example of Build Back Better as it pertains to Biden and the UN OECD policy is what's on the now. The American Rescue Plan of 2020 is right now it's at the House. The House is expected to pass this by special rules. These are committee propositions because the House and the Senate, because of the politics of Congress, which we don't have time to get into. These are going to be passed through committee, and then they'll be sent over to the Senate, in which Senate will have to take it up next week. And since they're done with all the impeachment stuff, they should be able to get to this. And that's when really a lot of the negotiations will take place at the Senate level. So if you're paying close attention, you'll see how the sausage is made in terms of the deals for the Senate to see what happens here. So I just want to talk a little bit, and I guess I'm okay with time, I hope. I just want to go through a little bit about the American Rescue Plan Act and talk about the committee reports, particularly as these things might impact Georgia trade, manufacturing, and commerce. So each one of these are committee reports that were submitted as part of the act that will be approved most likely by the House by this weekend, and then they'll be sent over to Senate next week. So these are the things they're going to be negotiating and discussing. For agriculture, and in particular, agriculture has been hit very hard by the trade wars with China in particular. Even the phase one operation that Trump administration was able to get China to agree to hasn't been fulfilled. China has not done its part in terms of buying the agricultural products that it said it would. So agriculture is particularly hard hit. And in Georgia, this is a big one for us. So in the rescue plan, the plan ultimately would be to provide, to buy up surplus agricultural products and then redistribute them to folks in need, organizations in need. And so the government will essentially purchase this stuff. And I know these are things that normally occur, but they're specifically occurring here for these reasons to be able to manage the crisis. And the idea of this is to get everybody back on sort of a level productive playing field. So there'll be grants available to processing and distribution, including vessels. So we're here we are in Savannah, near Savannah, Brunswick, and even the inland ports. So you can see that the public health is the main priority, but there's an economic element to this to be able to get folks in need, the nutritional basis, children in particular, Head Start, Food for Peace, and the other nutritional assistance programs. Education and labor. There's a realization that educational programs have been hard hit, particularly ones that offer children an opportunity to get out and play, to have mental health breaks, to be able to keep up with their studies, because home study doesn't usually go as well. And some of you guys who've tried to home study can probably empathize with me in trying to home study your kids in the early part of this COVID. And so basically there's a recognition that there's a behavioral health need, a physical health need, a creative expression and all that stuff. Increases in the minimum wage will occur over the course of 5 years. So you can see the step rates there. And ultimately they're going to sort of try to weed out some of the tip wage. So the people who are relying on tips for a living, they'll be able to get a little bit more steady income. As a certified bartender myself, it would be nice to earn a little bit higher wage. So as part of the labor, there's also extending the unemployment, providing care for aging families, and providing support for domestic abuse. There's a real recognition that folks who've been quarantined with their families, if you have a good family, it's good. If you have a bad family, it's very bad. And I think that, again, this is to be able to get people the help that they need to be able to get back to doing what they want to be doing, to deliver higher quality of life. So energy and commerce, there's CDC support, supply chain resilience, first and foremost with what we need for COVID, the creation of that public health workforce to be able to go out there and squash COVID. And then it's some inclusive policies to make sure that Medicaid and CHIP includes COVID coverage. In order to make this work, financial services to promote the Defense Production Act, and this will allow for medical supplies, equipment. We have several folks on here who work in medical devices and pharmaceuticals to be able to provide for these supply chains to be strengthened and maintained, and also for construction folks out there to refit the facilities that are inadequate for the distribution and support. So housing assistance, small business credits, to deal with the impacts of COVID, to help folks get over that, and then the airlines payroll support program to promote job retention. So another Georgia business here, that payroll support specifically geared toward airlines. We've talked about state and local government assistance already. This is one of the Title V oversight and reform. To be able to provide that assistance, to be able to manage health crisis. And I think it's important, not just the emergency expenses, but the economic impacts of emergencies. And so this is something that I think that when the grants start rolling out for these kinds of things, if this is all approved, then I think this is an area where a lot of the folks who are involved in the World Trade Center Savannah could look for to be able to expand, particularly if we can pull together, the manufacturing, and the green technology, sort of like the KB Autosys and I know there's some trouble with the SK Innovation batteries, but those types of larger deals where you're really bringing folks in, this might be an opportunity to sort of offset some of those economic impacts. It's a little bit more ambiguous phrase. So small businesses, the Paycheck Protection Program will be extended from the original CARES Act, and forgiveness will exist as well. If they haven't gotten a disbursement of that, the people who haven't gotten one get first dibs, and then there's a second one to go into. There's an expedited approval and disbursement for the disaster loans, the IEDL. Additional support specifically targeted toward restaurants, food and beverage establishments, managing the crisis for them and the innovation that they've showed to try to stay in business. And then to promote navigators, and essentially what this means is people who are trained in small business administration policies to help other small businesses to realize, hey, there's grants out there we could apply for. Hey, there's programs we could get in. Hey, there's tax credits, that kind of thing. Transportation infrastructure. Georgia has done a phenomenal job of building its infrastructure in terms of making itself marketable to international trade. We have the inland ports directed toward the deep water ports in Statesboro and Savannah. Obviously, you guys, we have a small airport up there in Atlanta that is the largest in terms of passenger load, the deep freeze facilities there and everything else, and of course the port at Savannah, which is the largest container port, right? And so fourth largest in terms of volume and all that stuff. So we've done a really good job here in Georgia of making sure that our transportation can get to where they need to get to. So I think from an international trade perspective, Georgia is very well poised to take advantage of this. Particularly, I know that there's development down there in Garden City about the highways and trying to get the trucks on and stuff like that. Within, I say Georgia Highways puts the entire country in a 2-day truck drive. So anywhere in the country you can get here in 2 days under the rules about how much you can drive a truck. And there's all the newer rules on hauling. Many of you guys will probably know that far better than me, but that there's limits now on how much they can drive and GPS and all that stuff. So another thing, aviation manufacturing job protection. So the skilled employees who are doing that kind of work, we don't want to see them leave, and we don't want the company to be negatively impacted. And so part of this is to be able to provide for relief for airports and for aviation manufacturing. Veterans Affairs, expedited claims, homes. Key to this is really the rapid retraining program. So the idea is the veterans who are here that maybe hadn't gotten a job, who are rotating back, to be able to retrain them, particularly in green energy jobs or in public safety. So just a few more sort of, this is the last one of these slides here. The extension of CARES, we talked about that, the unemployment benefits, the caregiver corps, another element of what Biden talked about during his campaign. Infection control support or nursing support to be able to administer vaccines, and to sort of a strike force to be able to be ready to sort of manage new outbreaks as they come around. And then to create a medical reserve corps, mainly of retired or part-time folks who can step in and facilitate, take the burden off of our frontline workers who are full-time. The stimulus checks are there. An increase in the child tax credit is expected as well. So to go from $3,000 or $3,600, depending upon the age of the child. And then if you don't have children, then expansion of the earned income credit. And then you can see the family leave stuff there. So that's the end of my presentation as far as what was scripted. I'm actually pretty close to being on time. I hope I didn't go too fast with that. I know we wanted to give an opportunity for folks to sort of ask questions, and I hope we can have a discussion about some of these things as well. So thank you for listening to the scripted portion. I will turn it over to you, Lee.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And again, anybody who has any questions, either raise your hand. Antoine, I hope you'll look at the hand raising for me. And please don't hesitate to put questions in the chat box, as we have plenty of time. But Chris, I want to start out just by asking you, I mean, we covered a lot, or you covered a lot in your presentation, hitting on a lot of stuff domestic, which is certainly important and goes without saying. But while infrastructure and climate change are certainly important, so is international trade, and we certainly can't put trade on the back burner. So what do you maybe see as the most critical or pressing issues for international trade going forward, whether it's continuation of what the past administration was doing, or a change that may need to take place in the current administration to put that on the front burner and keep it going?
I think that the first part of international trade being related to all of these things, I think that the Biden administration has made it clear that these are sort of all tied together. And in order to be able to get to that next part, we need to make sure that COVID is under control. And so rebuilding or managing our public health crisis, to use their terminology, and the economic crisis together. And so the first thing I would say is, in order to do that, we need to, there's a clear effort to restructure our economy for the future. So I think anything that has to do with trade is going to have to fit into this sort of framework, whatever the new framework is. And I think what you're seeing is the reason why there hasn't been a whole lot of movement on tariffs so far is because he established a review for the supply chain. I think what we're doing is we're basically taking stock of where we are and where we need to be. Biden is a lot more deliberate, and he's backed up by experts who were around during, the Obama era as well. And so that there is a sense of, okay, we had a plan in place, it was interrupted, but what do we have to deal with? Where are we going with it? I don't think Biden is Obama, though, so I don't want to say that they're the same, but I think his administration is going to take a hard look. What do I think that means what do I think as far as trade? I think there's a few things. The number one thing I think we need to do as far as international trade is to rebuild trust. I think the United States has an opportunity to redesign or rewrite some of the existing trade relationships. These are things that have sort of evolved over time. And with this, not only do you have a disruption with Trump administration, you also have the disruption with COVID, which provides a bit of an opportunity for us to move forward and sort of renegotiate things. So I think that's the first thing is that we have an opportunity to rewrite things. I think we will rejoin all of those organizations. I think we will rejoin all of those trade regimes. However, we have an opportunity in rejoining to sort of make them better for us. Walking away is one thing, right? The disengagement philosophy says we don't have to necessarily deal with any of these things, but it's far more effective if we, the United States and our economy, re-engage these things on terms that are beneficial for us, right? If we're going to re-engage them now, and I think we will. So I think that we have to rebuild trust, first of all. And that's a hard one to build. I think by, the fact that there's a realization by Biden administration that globalization has had negative impacts on medium industries, promoting larger corporations, and then the American worker, particularly with manufacturing, that job creation is going to be another key component to this. So what you're going to see is a greater emphasis on manufacturing, a greater emphasis on job creation. And then the idea is that the jobs that are created wouldn't necessarily be simple jobs. They would be jobs that, or low paying jobs. These would be jobs that would provide for a degree of purchasing power. Because one of the key things that's sort of underlying this development is consumption. That if we can get Americans, I mean, if you're going to produce American, you got to produce American to buy American, but you have to have people to buy American. And so part of the raising of $15, part of the idea of getting folks back to work with reasonable wages in manufacturing and the industrial base is really about purchasing power. So I think part of that is related to that. And then the deeper holistic issues, about providing a better social safety net for folks to be able to have a higher quality of life, to take some of the burden off of the working class folks. And Biden, he's always championed himself as working class. He took the train to DC every day and to and from Wilmington. So that's always been part of his image. So as far as trade goes, obviously inclusive growth is one of the pillars of this as well, to be able to take advantage of all talents, to be able to engage the wider society. So I think any trade deals that we make under Biden should be redesigned to protect and benefit medium-sized, the SMEs, and not just the larger MNCs and stuff like that. And some of the stuff that we'll talk about probably a little bit later, the GILTI stuff is related to that. If I could take a separate tone with this is, I think when we think about trade, we have a tendency to see trade in sort of like these sort of silos, right? You guys don't, because you're in the middle of it. But as far as American, the rhetoric of trade, when we talk about this kind of thing, we have a tendency to see trade as sort of somewhat adversarial, to the American workers. It's either this negative sum game. It's China's gain, it's our loss, that kind of thing. And in some cases, that's true, right? As offshoring companies and jobs and all that stuff. And you guys are all familiar with that. But I think that folks who really focus on concepts of national interest and security have a tendency to promote this narrative above other ones. And the domestic context in which this trade occurs relies really on the social context as well. So all of these social elements play a role in this. I don't want to say trade seems like international, domestic, and things like that. Globalization has blended those things, and you guys are an example of all that stuff. So we're talking really about interdomestic policies, right? So not so much one or the other. And the idea that they can be positive sum games, right? It doesn't have to be someone's loss is someone else's direct gain, right? So I guess I'm throwing a little IR theory jargon, but I think it's stuff that you guys clearly understand, given your job roles and your interests. So I hope that I answered that question a few different ways. I'm sorry. But I hope that was helpful, and I'll be happy to clarify anything or be more specific.
Thank you. I think, Andrew, you had a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question of Dr. Brown?
Dr. Brown, I had posted it on the chat as well, but my question was regarding the tariffs that have been put in place on steel imported to the U.S., particularly how it impacts the automotive manufacturing industry in Georgia?
This is a good one. I know, first of all, let me say, thank you for your question. I don't see any new tariffs right now. I don't see any evidence of anything new. I really think that right now what the Biden administration is doing reviews on everything to be able to reform and restructure things so that it can promote the idea of buy made in America, and then the supply chains. Now, with that said, I could see the key word for me is leverage in this. He inherited a system that was like this, right, from Trump, and in some of the pre-existing relationships that existed. And so I think it's an opportunity for him to basically say, let's not do anything rash, let's be deliberate about this, and then we use this as leverage. What I can see with the tariffs, particularly the steel tariffs, and we know he just reinstituted the UAE one, the 10% there. The tariffs I would see cuts in the tariffs. I don't necessarily see any elimination of the tariffs right away. And the reason being is that China is not following up on the phase one, if we're talking about in Chinese tariffs in particular. And so I think what Biden wants to see is if China really wants to cooperate, as they say they're willing to cooperate, if they're willing to cooperate, then they need to show that they're willing to play. And I think that this gives the United States a little bit of leverage to say, okay, well, here's an area where we could cooperate. I'll reduce your tariffs here if, you buy some more of this or whatever, or you reduce your tariffs on these kinds of things. So I think it gives a little bit of grounds for negotiation, sort of a point of departure for that. With regard to the auto industry, steel is a tough one to get around. There's no doubt about that. But I think with the auto industry has an opportunity here in terms of the emphasis on green energy. I know that the emissions, I know that the fuel efficiency or fuel economy issues are problematic if we're shifting from Trump to something that existed before, or if we're going in line with some more of the international standards on these kinds of things. So I think that the automotive industry, by joining the Paris Agreement, if nothing else, the automotive industry has found itself that it has to make some decisions. And I don't think Biden has specifically said yet what those percentages are going to be. The 4.7 to 1.5, I think, is all open for lobbying and negotiation. The other impact of that is obviously it's a union operation. So I think that Biden is going to want to make sure that it survives. If for no other reason than the American manufacturing and the American union workers, who he sees himself as a champion of. I think there's going to be some short-term costs involved in these changes, but in the long run, I think the automotive industry will be more efficient or more competitive, let's say, with Europe, Japan, and China for these things. And I think here in Georgia, you got a good start. There's a good start of a lot of these greener technologies and the EV batteries and things like that. And we're getting to the point where we're starting to build that kind of the manufacturing that the Biden administration is saying this is our next generation stuff. So I don't see any new tariffs. If anything, I see them changing, and where I'd see them changing most readily is in Canada and the EU. So I will say that I expect those tariffs to lessen faster than the others. However, I think right now they're being used as bargaining chips. So I can't give you a timeline. I guess it depends on how everything else goes. If the American Rescue Plan is approved, that's a big jump in terms of what Biden is hoping to do on his first 100 days. And then maybe international stuff would take international trade in this regard would take another step. I do see tariffs in the future with this administration being more closely tied to human rights violations and violations of international law, not based on sort of personal beefs. The challenge is the Rust Belt. As you know, if we removing tariffs on one part puts pressure on another part of that same demographic group. And so that, I guess this is the balancing act. And these were the voters who were helped Trump win. And these are the voters who helped Biden win. So this is a key block of voters that we have to try to do right by.
Chris, you kind of mentioned or touched on this a minute ago, but so question, while Biden considers most nations to be partners of ours and not adversaries, and of course, globalization has impacted us all. But do you think or have a sense that that Biden administration's Buy America initiative could impact trade or foreign investment into the U.S. In a negative way at all?
Again, with any kind of policy change, there's going to be winners and losers in this. And I think that the overall Buy America plan, I mean, first of all, it sounds like, you know, we always say Buy America, right? This plays good for politics when we talk about Buy America. The devil's always in the details. I think if you can establish this workforce development, you know, and this future sustainability, in the long run, it's going to be effective. The short run, what does this mean, right? What does this mean to Buy America, Made in America? I think some of the policies that are already existing with this, and again, I keep talking about the GLTI stuff. Some of the policies that they have discussed, if you look at the OECD's policy on the BEPS 2.0, and again, you guys are not familiar with that. Basically, it tries to close loopholes on companies that are taking advantage of tax situations by avoiding taxes in multiple places. And that GLTI that is an effort to sort of stop that loophole. In the Build Back Better program for the UN, there's talk about better global governance and better regulatory mechanisms. So I do see that the first part of that is I see that the folks who are operating in multiple locations, who are right now have advantageous tax situations because they're able to avoid them by that status, may have to come under increased scrutiny. This is the basic erosion and profit sharing 2.0 from the OECD, if you guys are interested. This is something that the increase in the GLTI is specifically directed toward that. The other thing is that the corporate tax rate, the proposal to go from 28 to 21% will definitely impact corporations as well. So the Made in America has to be funded by something, and the idea is to take that pressure off of the middle class and to have corporations pay their share. So if corporations are the ones mainly driving international trade, multinational corporations, then those two policies are designed to impact them. Another one is the surtax that's placed on these multinational corporations for operating overseas and then selling back to the United States. So what we saw, it's not just been Trump, it's been a process of globalization, is if companies, you know, say go set up in Mexico and then sell their products back to the United States, there's a plan to put a 10% surcharge on those companies for doing that. Now, how you could get around that surtax, how you could get around this GLTI is if you repatriate jobs, if you bring jobs back into the United States. So there's a two-sided thing to this. We're reversing Trump's policies that promoted larger multinational corporations in favor of the SMEs, the small to medium enterprises. And then there's another piece to this, which is basically to bring the jobs back in, particularly the skilled manufacturing jobs. To bring those jobs back in, you can basically get tax credits for bringing jobs back in. Does that make sense? From that question as far as the Made in America, I know tax policies, there's nothing more political than tax policy, let's say that. So it's fun, but it's also pretty heavy stuff. Some of you guys are lawyers out there and you deal with this stuff. So this is nothing new for any of you. I think that the challenge of, let me put it this way. I don't think that Made in America is as harmful as America First for global trade. I think what it is, it's a new set of rules designed for tomorrow's economy. And fortunately, I think that our partners in the EU are already a little bit ahead in many cases with the green economy. China has gotten ahead with the green, recognizing that it's a growth engine. So I think the technology, innovation, and things that are sustainable are going to be the thing that we're going to need to manage in the future. So the Made in America, I think, is an opportunity for us to redesign the global economy. Let's say if Biden has his druthers and we redesign the global economy for a sustainable future, it would be extremely revolutionary. Revolutionary on the scale of the New World Order in the aftermath of the Second World War, if we're able to recreate a global economy that promotes a sustainable future, right? And that it seems to be the thing that our younger generations are looking for as well. Not that they just want it, they understand it and they need it. and they did vote overwhelmingly in favor of these green economic initiatives. So so for me, I think that it's going to hurt a little bit, and it's going to hurt some companies that are not capable of innovating, if it works. But again, Congress, there's a lot of things that can go on in the meantime, to be able to lobby for certain policies. I mean, Georgia, to its credit, seems to be on board with promoting green economic initiatives, particularly with manufacturing. And so solar power is going through the roof. Nuclear power is a variant option. They're building the new cooling tower plant there. So to try to expand that, reduce our reliance on coal and things like that. And there's new jobs that come up with that. So I see it as Georgia specifically is in a position to take advantage of this better than most countries.
So do you think we're going to still continue to play hardball with China?
Yeah, I do. Contrary to the rhetoric of the campaign, I don't see Biden as being soft on China at all. I mean, in fact, any talk about, the being socialist or whatever was basically just campaign rhetoric. I don't see Biden as backing off on China in particular. He's, if anything, let's say, I see that there is again, the tariffs that are existing now are still in place. And I think that Biden is going to expect that China make good on some of its promises before we move forward. There's other factors, I think, involved in Biden's relationship with China. And some of that has to do with, he sees it as working multilateral, first of all, through international organizations, WTO, through our relationships with Europe. I mean, Biden is a huge fan of working with Europe and through these problems. And so I think there's a way for the United States to be able to sort of get an end run on the budding China-EU relationship. So I think that human rights are going to play a bigger role. So I think the Biden administration is going to try to hold China to a standard that the Trump administration and even the Biden administration the Obama administration didn't hold the Chinese to. So I think that's going to play a role. China has its issues with its neighbors as well. It's an opportunity for the United States to be able to exercise some leverage, to regain some soft power. Hong Kong is a tough spot for China as well. I think that the biggest concern, I suppose, outside of human rights and some of the opportunities for leveraging China's neighbors against it in terms of India and things like that, and Vietnam as well, is the potential politicization or weaponization of science. And I think that that's a real concern, sort of the future technology, cyber intelligence operations, and those sorts of things that already are sort of going on now, are something from a security perspective and from really an opportunity for entrepreneurial public-private initiatives, which is really where we should be with this. This should be a public-private initiatives where the United States government actively, tries to cultivate domestically these digital services and the cyber intelligence operations, sort of the gray operations, if you will. So China is designed well for the idea of the state economy driving everything under sort of artificial rules. And so I think that for the United States I don't think we would break. Like I said, I don't think there's going to be any shift in tariffs right away. And I think if we do, we're going to weaken them to bring China to the table to have conversations. The trade war in China hasn't really helped anyone. I mean, I'm sure there's always winners and losers, but they said that the average income lost of the trade war for every American last year was $1,300 out of our household pockets because of the trade wars driving up prices and things like that. Not to mention providing a great degree of, this instability, right? This playing havoc and how are things going to work? So it's driven our deficit up as well. As November was pretty ugly. So bilateral trade right now with China is pretty steady under the new existing wherever we're at. But it's clearly not where either one of us wants to be. And I think the tariffs provide an opportunity for us to be able to get them to the table to have conversations about stuff. Sorry if I went off on a lot of different
Oh, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but if anybody else has another question, we have a few more minutes. And I just have one more. And, you know, speaking of Georgia, we're, you know, in Georgia, we have a lot of assets in Georgia, which is great. And you highlighted many of them in your presentation. But, you know, how do you think Georgia companies can strategically position themselves in this post-pandemic world, hopefully soon post-pandemic world, for opportunities, whether that's domestic or international?
I think Georgia companies, I think Georgia companies are in a good spot right now, generally, to be able to take advantage of the kinds of things that the Biden administration is promoting for the Build Back Better. As far as being able to take advantage of those things a little bit better, job creation is critical. I see the particularly of skilled jobs, and if again in manufacturing and in clean energy, inclusiveness. I see that there's been and you guys probably are already on. You just saw the Coca-Cola thing that's blown up on social media about, you know, the inclusion and diversity, and that's something that has been really big. I mean, Georgia Southern has had its fair share of negative press because of you know, existing attitudes that are not seen as inclusive. And so what you know, Georgia Southern and other institutions have done is really launched, you know, these diversity and inclusive initiatives. And I see that legislation and grants and things like that will probably be increasingly tied to how much can you incorporate in this, how much minority entrepreneurship, those kinds of things. Are these policies consistent with the Biden expectation? So that workforce development will have to take into consideration all of these different social things. I think there needs to be, and maybe a greater investment in technology, future technology, and green technology. I realize that these are expensive, mainly because they're newer, and so it just might be something that folks need to keep on the horizon. Is how you're going to get to this spot. I think, again, there's a lot of grants that will be coming available, assuming this goes through. I know there are out there already, that I would think would be beneficial to the right proposal. As I am the grant reviewer for the National Endowment for Humanities. And so, you know, the grants that are written, grants that get allocated funding are ones that suit the mission. And if the mission is designed to satisfy, you know, future technology, green manufacturing, job creation, workforce development, maybe some transition of veterans to work type thing, you know, that these would be opportunities to be able to get those grants, that funding, and perhaps even some tax credit help on some of these repatriation of jobs. So trying to make sure that I don't miss anything on my thoughts about Georgia. In doing my research, I was very impressed, you know, with how well Georgia is poised. I think, you know, notwithstanding the SK battery concerns with their own, industrial espionage and stuff like that. You know, Georgia is in a good place. We have the fourth largest port, largest airport in terms of passenger, you know, largest container operation. The dredging that's going on through the grants in Savannah Port will allow the Neo Super Panamax ships to come in. You know, there's all these new things that are coming down the pike. And I think it's good. If the American Rescue Plan passes, that really helps those logistical companies that are going to be on the front lines of this new trade operation. I think things are only going to get better from this. I don't see things as being harder. If you're a SME, small to medium enterprise here, or a multinational corporation that's based in the United States, I think you're going to do quite well. I think Georgia is a good place to be.
That certainly ends on a high note. So thank you for that. We are butting out of time. We're right at 12:01. But Lauren, you did have a question. If you could, if you wanted to ask your question really quickly, I would hate to end this call without that. And Chris, you just have to answer it kind of quick.
Yeah, I was just curious about if you think there are going to be any more currently emerging economic trends in addition to green energy and manufacturing.
Um, well, I think that encompasses a lot of different things. I mean, you're talking about redesigning the energy grid, right? Being able to provide for larger technology and, in terms of, information technology and digital services, which is going to come with a need for oversight and things like that. Just thinking in terms of if there's a shift in terms of the federal fleet of vehicles from a combustion to a electronic, that would drive the demand for something like that. That would be, again, it would be a bit of a hardship, although I think that the automotive industry is in a better position now than it was, say in 2012 to be able to deal with these kinds of things. But the shift would be more, will be a greater sort of shift than just tinkering here and there. It might start off as that, but I think that there'll be a cascading effect that will impact other areas. So immediately off the top of my head, the big push on Biden is basically green technologies, right? And the manufacturing and things like that. But there's a whole cascading effect of those things. The education, right? To be able to train those workers, to the social services that come up around, the talk about the children and families and all this stuff. And I realize this is heavier thing, but all of those are going to need other resources as well, right? One of the reasons why, when you're putting a factory and bringing the jobs in is that it brings in the company, and you often will assign them sort of here's the land for a song, and, here's all these tax rebates and things like that, because the overall benefit is larger, the impact from, being able to bring taxes in and all that other stuff. But I see the same thing happening here. I think this is just the first phase of that, is that there's a realization that globalization has caused a negative impact for our industrial base, and that in order to build for longer term, we need to rebuild the manufacturing. But those public-private initiatives, I don't honestly know if the U.S. government really knows what they need to do from an advanced technology perspective yet. And I think those are conversations that are ongoing. I mean, someone like Elon Musk has ideas, right? And he's doing things, right? The Tesla and the space rockets and things like that. And, he's gotten plenty of funding for those things, but it's largely a public-private thing. I mean, these were things that he was already kind of doing, and I think that there's going to be room for that in an innovative economy. But, the manufacturing probably would need to be the base of this for now, but it won't be the only thing. So.
Thank you.
Technology, and innovation, green manufacturing, elements of the green economy, and then sustainable stuff, particularly farming, fishing, forestry, right? All of those things are going to need to be. So you think about what the next generation of what can I do that's going to make whatever I'm doing sustainable for my children, or my grandchildren. That's where I think we need to be thinking in terms of Georgia. Could be anything, right? Any kind of business can operate like that, but where is it going in the future? So don't look back.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for your time. And there were some very late last-minute questions in the chat box, but for those of you who posted them, we'll try to get with Dr. Brown and get them answered and shoot them out to the group. And thank you, everybody, for your time today. We appreciate it. If World Trade Center Savannah can help you with anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Antoine. And Dr. Brown, on behalf of yourself and Georgia Southern University, thank you for your time and your research on this topic in the state of Georgia. And we look forward to a great 2021. And thanks again for your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you all. Please share my contact information. If anybody wants to get in touch or talk about anything, you see, as a professor, I like to talk. So
great.
Reach out. We'll talk.
Thanks so much. Everybody have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.